This is Harsh Rules, I'm Ben Harsh, and today we're going to learn to play Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit number 2. Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit number 2 was released in 2005 by Multiman Publishing and Avalon Hill and designed by Ken Dunn. This game supports 2 players and takes about 2 hours to play. Before we begin this episode, I'd like to recognize the Harsh Rules Patreon supporters that help make content like this possible. If you'd like to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/harshrules to learn more. And once again, thank you for your support. Welcome back to the Harsh Rules breakdown for Advanced Squad Leader Starter Kit number 2. In this episode, we're going to cover rules related to the movement of guns. Ordnance, often referred to as guns, are heavy, complex pieces of machinery. Therefore, it's important to know that a soldier must be qualified in a gun's use to fully operate it. But what happens if a gun doesn't have a crew? Can it still be operated? The answer is yes, with the restrictions of non-qualified use. Non-qualified use refers to the use of a gun by units other than a crew. Therefore, soldiers attempting to use a gun that are not trained for it do so with a significant +2 DRM penalty. This is the third number on the Fire Base to Hit DRM list. Number 4 is also worth pointing out. The same +2 DRM penalty applies when any unit attempts to use a captured gun. Once again, the logic is they have not been trained to use that specific piece of ordnance. So now that we understand the value of having a qualified crew operate a gun, let's look at another feature that qualified gun crews can take advantage of. All anti-tank and infantry guns have a gun shield to help protect their crews. The gun shield protects its good order manning crew only from most attacks that originate through the gun's covered arc. Infantry manhandling a gun may not benefit from a gun shield. The manning crew protected by a gun shield may add +2 to the infantry fire table dice roll, +1 versus mortar, or 0 versus a flamethrower. The gun shield DRM is never cumulative with the other terrain effects modifiers, including emplacement, but can modify an infantry fire table dice roll after terrain effects modifiers have been used to modify a to-hit dice roll. Also note that a gun shield die roll modifier never applies to a direct hit. Next, let's look at the advantages a gun can have from setup. Any gun that has not been moved during the scenario is in-placed, unless set up on a paved road. If emplaced, a gun and its manning crew are entitled to a +2 emplacement terrain effects modifier. This emplacement terrain effects modifier cannot be used in conjunction with any other terrain effects modifier or gun shield DRM. If the ordnance piece is equipped with a gun shield, the owner may choose to use the gun shield terrain effects modifier or the emplacement terrain effects modifier, but not both. An important note, emplacement cannot be used if the gun is manned by a non-crew unit. In other words, non-qualified use, such as a gun operated by a squad, will negate the emplacement terrain effect modifier. Also be aware that if a gun is moved, it loses its emplacement status. A gun cannot be re-emplaced in a new location. Finally, let's cover off on a special setup feature of guns called Hidden Initial Placement, or HIP. An in-place gun and its crew may always set up using Hidden Initial Placement, unless on a paved road. The gun owner records the gun's location and covered arc during setup. The gun and crew counters are then placed to the side and not placed on the board until the gun loses its HIP. An HIP gun in open ground or unpaved road loses HIP when a good order enemy unit is within 16 hexes and has line of sight to the gun. A gun that fires, changes covered arc, or attempts to move or whose crew moves loses Hidden Initial Placement. In addition, if an enemy unit attempts to enter a hex that contains an HIP gun, the enemy unit is returned to its prior hex, its movement ends, and the gun loses hidden initial placement. Now that we understand these concepts, let's take a look at a movement example to understand how gun movement works. Before we begin, an important note. The emplacement and manhandling example in printings of ASL Starter Kit number 2 and ASL Starter Kit number 3 have numerous errors. These appear to have been corrected in ASL Starter Kit number 4. Therefore, we will be using the revised example for this rules breakdown. Next, let's review an example for emplacement and manhandling. The 57mm anti-tank gun in D6 is manned by a 227 American crew. There is also an 8-1 leader in the same hex space. This gun started the scenario emplaced and with hidden initial placement, often referred to as HIP. Emplacement refers to a gun that was not set up on a paved road and has not been moved. So, in this example, it appears that the gun is set up on a road. However, roads come in two colors. Beige-colored roads are dirt roads, and gray-colored roads are paved roads. The road in this example is a dirt road, and since it is not a paved road, the gun can set up with hidden initial placement. As for bonuses, because it is emplaced, it receives a +2 terrain effects modifier to all attacks. From a defensive perspective, if the emplaced gun is successfully hit by enemy ordnance, an original infantry fire table dice roll resulting in a KIA result eliminates the crew and the gun. A K result eliminates the crew and malfunctions the gun. And if the original infantry fire table dice roll is not an original KIA or a K, and if the hit comes through the gun's covered arc, a qualified crew would add the +2 gun shield modifier, which is available to anti-tank and infantry gun types, to the infantry fire table dice roll. And now that we've got the situation set up, let's walk through the example. The American player wants to move the gun, crew, and the 8-1 leader to D5. So rather than fire in the prep fire phase, he attempts to manhandle the gun in the movement phase, which will cost him the gun's HIP status. If successful, this will only cost 4 movement factors. This is double the normal movement cost. Now, let's work through the manhandling calculation. The manhandling number is 10 as shown on the counter. The applicable dice roll modifier, as listed on the quick reference data card, are +1 for the terrain effects modifier, +4 for the movement cost, for a total of +5. The American player will then make a dice roll, add the DRM, and that total will be compared against the gun's manhandling number. If the American player rolls a 4 or lower, the gun, crew, and leader move to D5, and he may try to manhandle the gun again this turn. If he rolls a 5 for a final dice result of 10, he moves the gun and units to D5 and stops. Please note, in both cases, the American player can change the gun's covered arc. However, if the American player rolls a 6 or more, the gun cannot be moved this turn, and he cannot change its covered arc. For this example though, let's say the American player rolled less than a 6 and moved to D5. So now, because the final result was 9, which is below the manhandling number of 10, if the player has movement factors remaining, he can move again. So let's take a look and see what that calculation looks like. So let's say the American player decides to manhandle the gun again into D4. D4 is a grain field, which is out of season. This means the normal movement cost of 1 is doubled to 2. Next, let's calculate our die roll modifiers. There are no terrain effects modifiers for D4. There is a +2 for the movement factor cost, for a total of +2. For the 3 possible outcomes, here are the dice roll ranges. A dice result of 1 to 7, with the +2 DRM, is still below the manhandling number of 10, and is a success. A dice result of 8, with the +2 DRM, will be at the manhandling number and is considered a limited success. Anything above that is a failure. For our example here, let's say the player rolls an 8, with the +2 modifier makes it a 10 and a limited success. So the gun moves to the next hex, but can't move any further. The player also decides to maintain the angle for its covered arc. Having finished its moves, the gun is no longer in place. Any small arms, machine gun, or demolition charge attacks through the covered arc will receive the +2 gun shield DRM available to anti-tank guns, as will any infantry fire table dice rolls after an ordnance hit through the covered arc that does not result in original KIA or K results. Some final notes on manhandling guns for movement. A manhandling unit cannot use the assault movement, nor carry any portage points. Double time can be used, but road bonus cannot. A gun or unit that attempts to move by way of manhandling may not fire in the advancing fire phase. Manhandling is also considered hazardous movement, and any unit involved in manhandling a gun receives a -2 die roll modifier to any fire attack directed at it that player turn, regardless of fire phase, until it is pinned. And neither first fire movement in open ground nor first fire non-assault movement apply to hazardous movement. Before we close out this episode, let's cover off on limbered guns in the starter kits. As noted on page 4 of the rulebook, other guns cannot move during the course of an ASL scenario because they must be limbered to move, as indicated by limbered on the back of the counter. So limbering is not an option in the starter kit series. These counters provide this information so they're compatible with full ASL. And now that we've completed the example, this is a good place to stop for this episode. In the next episode of this series, we will continue learning the rules for ordnance. If you found this video helpful, please give me a like and share with your friends. To be the first notified when the next episode of Harsh Rules becomes available, please hit the bell icon for notifications. And as always, this has been Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.